Hi, I'm OmniSunday. If you're watching this video and have been alive for more than a few years, you've probably heard someone talk about some sort of god or divine power or something like that. Personally, I'm an atheist, but as the daughter of a pastor, I've definitely heard a thing or two about religion. In this video, I'm going to go over the religions, gods, and divine powers that people believe in around the planet called Origin. This is from the perspective of someone who doesn't follow any religion, and my analyses are going to be sort of surface level. Otherwise, the video would be a million years long. Hopefully, it'll be interesting to you anyway. First, some speculation on why religion exists in the first place. How and why does every culture seem to come up with the idea of the divine in one way or another? There are two theories I want to mention, with one suggesting it has to do with social togetherness or domination. Being religious could help early civilization with being on the same page and making people more likely to stay in line. Of course, something like that could easily turn bad, but you can imagine why some types of people would want it anyway. Some evidence for this theory is that while every sapient species is social to some degree, the less social ones tend not to go as hard at all on religion, such as Trifle, Noir, and especially Sporovvye. The other theory is nicknamed the God of the Gaps. It suggests that religion comes from curiosity, and how there are so many unanswered questions, it feels nice to have some sort of god to answer those questions. This theory explains the general decline of religion as science advances. So many previously unanswered questions can be deciphered without just saying God did it, so it makes more sense to assume that the other questions we can't answer aren't God either. The last thing I'll say before getting into it is that I'll generalize a lot by saying these people believe X, these people believe Y. Obviously, no group of people are a monolith, so don't take this as me saying they all believe the same thing. It's more that it's just the prevalent belief. Now let's go over some individual religions and their history. Starting with the adjutant, of course the first one I'll talk about will be Inviernism. It was the official religion of Draconia for most of its history, and is still widely practiced there, with over 60% of the population identifying with it somehow. Inviernism is one of the only two monotheistic religions on Origin, with the other being Denariism, which we'll talk about later. The Church of Origin is close, but technically monolatry, since while they only worship one god, they do believe in many. While Inviernism is practiced mostly by Nushus in the West, it has a lot of strange similarities to the Church of Origin practiced by humans in the East, especially for religions that developed completely separately, as Nushus had never seen humans or vice versa till relatively recently in history. Inviernism worships a 6-armed, 13-eyed deity called the Allfather, symbolized by the color red and a stylized eye. He made his followers in his own image, though along with the other oddities, he is abnormally large and covered in striking stripes and patterns. Everything I just said about this deity is shared between Inviernism and the Church of Origin, if you can believe it. I'll go over the human side of the story later in this video, but what sets Inviernism apart is that, of course, the followers made in the Allfather's image are Nushus, specifically Draconiae. The Inviernic Allfather's eye is almost always white on a red background, and so are the Allfather's stripes. While pretty much everyone draws the eye a bit differently, there are certain styles more common in one religion than another. There are also large differences in the actual lore of these religions. Inviernism centers the Allfather as the god of pretty much everything, though it's notable that while the Church of Origin calls the Allfather the god of sun, sea, and sky, similar to Inviernism, that's actually a more recent interpretation from the Middle Ages, when people of these religions met. In the Church of Origin, the Allfather used to be the god of unity and division. Anyway, Inviernism's Allfather is the creator, leader, and god over literally everything. It's said that he blotted out the sun thousands of years ago to cleanse the world of evil, and allowed his followers some light to allow them to survive this eternal winter's night. There are many animals used in representations of the Allfather, the most notable being owls, whitecats, and moths. Another thing that holds great importance in Inviernism is size. Something of unusually large size has religious and cultural significance, apart from whatever other benefits or disadvantages that come with it. The biggest example is the Good King himself, or really all the Menelgard kings. Apart from just being really tall for even a Draconiae, they have huge, unusual horns that are said to signify their royalty. Another example would be how Inviernism usually teaches that men are superior to women, because men are so much larger. That part is often conveniently overlooked nowadays though, as it's completely absurd to say that women and men don't have similar intellect in a world with modern science. Inviernists worship together in a church with very variable quantities of people per meeting. The most devoted members worship every week, but it's common to see huge bumps in attendance on certain holidays. Their worship consists of singing a few songs and then praying to an often very large statue of the Allfather for about an hour. All Draconiae, the red dragons, come from a relatively small place in the Glacient, so they all tend to have some form of Inviernism. The most notable divergence is Southern Draconiae, which have very variable beliefs but tend to have an idea of the Allfather focused on the skies and birds. Taniyn, the green dragons, have different religions depending on where they're from. Unfortunately, Middle Taniyn have gone through a near total cultural genocide by Draconiae, and nothing is preserved about their old religion. They mostly follow Inviernism if they follow any religion, but their worship culture is somewhat different. While churches aren't strictly segregated anymore, you will often see churches with a large majority of Taniyn and churches with a large majority of Draconiae with very little in between. Draconiae tend to be more conservative and stick to the texts, but Taniyn focus on interpretations and elaborations by other people. Draconiae churches usually have fewer members and more buildings, while Taniyn churches are usually packed with people every week. Inviernic Taniyn worship sessions are often much longer than Draconiae, with more songs and also lectures from people interpreting the text. Midwestern Taniyn are from the center of the Tombstone Desert, isolated in their own culture for most of their lives. They do a sort of ancestor worship where they pray to old ruins and sometimes even bones. They believe their ancestors must have been divine for how they survived in the Tombstone Relic and made it livable. In their culture, the color blue represents these divine ancestors. These Taniyn are the only ones who can sweat after childhood, and they thank their ancestors for this heat-resisting ability. Rarely, a Midwestern Taniyn is born with curly red hair, and they consider this to be a trait their ancestors must have had. While it doesn't protect the shoulders and back from sun as well as the usual straight black hair, it's amazing for heat dissipation. Far West Taniyn are also quite isolated, living on the other side of the vast desert away from Draconiae. The dominant religion there is called Heptagon, the Church of the Seven Sides. They define a person as having 7 inherent qualities, 4 considered positive and 3 considered negative. The positive ones are bravery, curiosity, kindness, and wisdom, while the negative ones are aggression, greed, and laziness. Each quality has 2 gods associated with it, one that supports the quality and another that goes against it. While every follower of Heptagon is encouraged to practice the 4 positive traits and deny the 3 negatives, what makes Heptagon unique is that each person is expected to choose one of the 7 typically considered good gods and follow them perfectly. For example, a child may choose Arza, god of bravery, and be expected to live their entire life never showing cowardice. It's looked down upon to switch gods, but not enough to shun a kid who switched gods once or twice. Reincarnation is an important part of their beliefs, and they teach that after 7 lives of worshipping each good god, a soul will finally die and become one with the gods. There's an important figurehead called the Wizard of El, who is sometimes expected to follow every single one of the gods perfectly. It goes like this: the first Wizard of El picks one of the 7 gods and follows them perfectly like anyone else is expected to do. After they die, a successor is chosen to follow the god the first guy picked, and another of their choosing, and they're called the second Wizard of El. This will continue until number 7, when their soul is said to die and another wizard is chosen. The practice of choosing wizards for Heptagon is starting to fall out of favor though. With modern technology, it's easier to prove that they're not actually perfect like they're supposed to be, and people are more skeptical of it. In a last-ditch effort to get more people to follow the religion, many individual churches of the 7 sides are denouncing the Wizard of El and relaxing some of their policies. Psudoxians have another polytheistic religion, but it's pretty different from the Taniyn ones. Their gods are very abstract, and it's pretty taboo to try to represent them visually. The head of the pantheon is called Void, the god of black and white. Black and white are sort of everything and nothing at the same time. Black is sort of nothing as it's the absence of light, but a black object is absorbing the whole spectrum of light, so it's sort of everything. White is nothing in the sense that it's a blank slate. It doesn't absorb anything in the visible light spectrum. White is also everything though, because it's the result of every color combined in a light like the sun. Void's mother is called Womb, god of creation. It gave birth to the Void, which created everything and nothing. There's an interesting god called Submission, god of safety. It has no evidence of existing before Nushu's rule, and teaches many strange things like how everyone must do lots of terrible procedures and rituals to be acceptable and safe. The most extreme is that shortly after birth, every baby girl must go through a procedure to permanently remove hair around the face, which usually involves a flame or a partial skinning down to the dermis. This procedure was so common that doctors would do it without even asking the patients, until that became illegal in 2066. The practice has mostly died out, but is still common in religious and royal families. Psudoxians can use their psychic power to change how people see them in many strange ways, and one of these rituals requires that all Psudoxians hide their mouths when with other people and eat in private. That one is still common today even among non-religious people. Another strict ritual is that if Psudoxians won't cut their hair, they must keep it in a single organized coil, rather than the natural tentacle-like net. It also requires that men shave their sensitive whiskers to match the beard. It's very likely that all these rules came from Newshus imposing their own standards on Psudoxians. Atheism has been very common in Psudoxians within the last few decades, especially when the Menogard Empire was divided and Pseudosia became its own country. Sporovvye are a sister species of Psudoxians I haven't really talked about yet, which are more different from Psudoxians than Taniyn are to Draconiae. The latter is separated by being subspecies within the same species, while the former are two separate species within a genus. Sporovvye are notable for having no known religion or spiritual beliefs at all. They're the least social sapient species, spending most of their adult lives alone in the wilderness. The only known religious Sporovvye are the ones raised in Pseudosian homes, which comes with many problems concerning their less social nature. Unlike their Pseudosian cousins, they avoided the worst of Newshus' rule and were rarely documented until it became safer for them. Rifa got an honorable mention for having their entire culture completely wiped out because they were under horrible oppression by Newshus for so long they literally evolved for it. Next, Lycans were the first sapient species to evolve on Origin that we know of. Their belief system starts with a story of creation. In the beginning, there was God. God split into two, creating the first people. These people split into 4, then 8, then 16, and civilization was born. Lycans have a queen who lays every egg, so most Lycans aren't concerned with reproduction. They consider everyone to be part of a god, and while some say that each generation is made up of smaller and smaller pieces, that's only a fringe ideology thought by most to just be an excuse to treat some people worse. Because most Lycans aren't concerned with reproducing, and most Lycans are female, they're something of a queer icon and commonly form interspecies romantic relationships. Lycans used to dominate the world with evidence of their cultures all over Origin, but cope with their diminishing by believing that the new people who replace them are all part of the same god that started with Lycans. They believe all life is the same and worth caring about. Theocrats are an animal-like plant that evolved for a parasitoid lifestyle, where their seeds grow on and eventually kill a host. They are Origin's only sapient plant though, and follow a religion that disallows them to kill other living things. They survive by harvesting fruit from trees, which they don't kill, only take advantage of, and shooting their seeds on a fruit mash mixed with soil for them to grow on. They're ruled by a figure they call the Raid Lord, who can supposedly speak to the sun itself. The orange stripes are just painted on, but they say a theocrat will be born with them and lead everyone to become a sun themselves. Next is the Glacient, so I want to mention how this video is kind of a spin-off from the anthropology video I'm working on about humans. I was writing so much about gods I figured I could make a separate video about it, which you're watching right now. I'm saying this though because if you watch that one when it comes out, you might recognize a lot of this stuff. Most of the Glacient is just more Draconia or Buksina, which is a relatively new colonized country with no notable religion, which I guess is notable on its own. Buksina separated from Draconia only a bit over a decade ago, citing their differences over the issue of wanting to own their businesses with less regulation versus the predominant way of doing things in Draconia, where the government technically owns all the businesses. While this may have played a part in their lack of religion, critics of their politics say they worship money instead. Noir religion doesn't really exist anymore since they're functionally extinct, but even when it did, it was really less of a practicable religion and more of a belief system. It's more similar to Lycan beliefs than anything else, with emphasis on an individual rather than a distant god. But Noir religion doesn't say everyone is part of a god, it's more that every Noir has the potential to be a god. Noir religion is about power and domination over your fellow man. Noir were some of the most powerful people to ever live, with their tiny country able to square up against the Empire of Draconia in its prime. The Noir express their magical power by dominating their environment, usually affecting color somehow. The last regime is known as the Dead's Flame, sapping the color from its surroundings. It can still be seen in Noir City, held up by the last Noir alive. The regime before that was the Invert Kingdom, which ended centuries ago with a dramatic and historic battle between the two most powerful men of their time. Clover, a country inhabited almost entirely by Trifle, is very notable for being the only legal system to have ever banned religion. While some may blame this on them being godless heathens, it's much more complicated than that. For one, while the law is technically still in the books, it hasn't been enforced in more than 200 years. Also, there's evidence that it was never fully enforced. The reason it came into law is because of a phenomenon called fairy circles. There's a rare organism in the area called a fairy leaf. It's a strange plant that can fly, though only in its seed form. They tend to arrange themselves in curious circles that contrast their surroundings with pink leaves and a strange dust floating within the circle. People who walk into these 2 to 3 meter radius circles will immediately feel a wave of pleasure paired with sleepiness. As soon as they hit the ground, they scream inconsolably until they are removed from the circle. Oftentimes, many people will get stuck in the circle as new people trying to help also fall into the trap. By the way, these effects don't only affect people, and this will more or less happen to any large enough warm-blooded animal who steps into the circle. A non-sapient animal rescued from the circle will live as normal until a certain thing happens, but a person able to recall their experience will speak of a utopia called ethos. They'll say they had the best time of their life and may even show aggression at being removed from the circle. Most will wish to go back, but either way something will happen about 2 weeks in, for any animal affected. It will quickly get harder and harder to breathe until their lungs collapse and they quickly die. If the victim is studied at any point during this process, a growing tree will be found embedded in the base of their lungs. If allowed to continue, it will grow into a new fairy tree that eventually releases its own fairy leaf seeds. In the wild, fairy trees can be seen growing on rotting corpses, sometimes in large piles with a tree for each corpse. They'll eventually root into the ground as normal, but often will still be in a weird pile. As you can imagine, people hate these trees and cut them down whenever possible, so they can only be found in the outskirts where people rarely go. So you might be wondering what that has to do with the banning of religion. Well, these people talking about ethos and turning into trees kind of turned into a big religious thing. Movements started preaching that the Fairy King would bring everyone away from the terrible world. This was outlawed because it was leading to many deaths, including some that wanted nothing to do with the Fairy King movement. It was the only real religion in Clover at the time, so general wording was used to ban it and reduce chances of its coming back. Next up is the Orient. Who can I start with but the Allfather, Origin himself, life incarnate, Lord of the Sun, Sea and Skies. We've already talked about him under the context of Inviernism, but while that shares a lot with the Church of Origin and Anthropos, the latter definitely deserves its own section. Like I've already said, before the Old World and the New World met, the Church of Origin's Allfather was the god of unity and division. Unity of people and gods, but division of task and priority among them. You'll notice that a lot of the gods in this religion have morals to them. Whether you agree with the morals or not is a different question, and the Allfather's moral was that there is no unity without division. It preaches a strictly hierarchical worldview where some people are simply more important than others, depending on what they do. While the Allfather wasn't exactly the leader, he was seen as kind of like a manager who had no real skill on his own, but told everyone else what to do, and that was moralized into a good thing for people to do through this religious text. When the Middle Ages came, outside tensions with the discovery of another similar but more powerful religion, along with inner tensions about the king not deserving the power he has, kind of combined into a revolution with the politics of Anthropos. With the gods, it turned into a my dad can beat your dad type thing, where the Church of Origin adopted many of Inviernism's beliefs about how powerful the Allfather is, and he became a god above all gods type deal in Anthropos. Many ultra-conservative people still talk about how the Allfather is the god of unity and division, and talk about all that hierarchy stuff, but officially the Allfather rules over the others because he's more powerful. He rules over them because he can do what they do better, and it's expected to believe the same about the king, whether that's true or not. In a text known simply as the Biblios, which is revered as holy by everyone under the Church of Origin, there's a verse that reads something like this. In the beginning, Origin created life in a pool of water. All power comes from the water. Unfortunately, the original language doesn't say water, only something like fluid, so a certain division translates that as blood. Their central study of magic is blood magic, which revolves around the conception of blood as a power source. And I can't talk about the Church of Origin without talking about this primary mode of worship, drinking the blood of their enemies. It's earned them the nickname Church of Blood and the Allfather God of Blood. While this probably tastes really bad and can lead to tummy aches in the short term and iron poisoning in the long term, it has a very strong benefit. Most animals store their mana in and around their stomachs for quick burning, but humans evolved to store their mana in their blood. Drinking human blood can give someone a very quick mana boost, allowing them to do a lot of feats they couldn't do before. It's a large part of how Anthropos has become the superpower it is today. It's common in Anthropos to take war prisoners, feed them nothing but sugar till they die, bleed them into barrels and ferment it for their famous blood wine. This not only makes it last longer for transport, but also makes it taste better and adds an addictive quality to it that allows for more popularity and more money going to the Anthroposian government. There's also rumors that the church harvests iron from the blood, supposedly just to reduce iron poisoning. The Church of Blood has many more gods than the Allfather, so let's talk about them. Drazi is a god that's commonly known about in Western Anthropos and the surrounding regions, but not really worshipped very commonly apart from decentralized cults here and there. Drazi represents different things to different people, but in the Anthroposian church lore, he is the god of the infinite skies, but also god of the invisible ceiling. He is said to keep fools in their place and maintain the status quo. Because Anthropos was once a country of rebels, that second one has historically been a negative thing about Drazi. Now that Anthropos is a status quo though, it's becoming more common to see Drazi in a positive light, as a guardian of the church even if he's not to be worshipped. He guards the invisible ceiling that keeps the lowly in their place, but enables the infinite skies to allow the already powerful to soar yet higher. He's also known as the god of the Great Divide, or just Great Divide. Xentun is a symbol of a variety of loosely related things and can be viewed positively or negatively by different people, or even by different proverbs in the same book. Xentun is the god of the seas, perseverance, greed, diligence, and unrelenting rain. Xentun persevered with his rain, allowing the whole planet to be filled with life from the waters. He had to be diligent with his rain, with a steady and controlled flow to keep everyone happy. But going too far can lead to greed. Xentun's unrelenting rain could swallow the whole of Origin. People associate greed with an unrelenting rain of effort, but they also associate the unrelenting rain with perseverance and diligence. Men who don't take no for an answer might associate this with the positive aspects of Xentun, when others think it's clearly the negatives. Xentun is known and respected in the Anthroposian church lore, but rarely worshipped. I said Drazi's cults were decentralized, but Xentun's are much more so and much rarer. Dorodeia is the next god I want to talk about, and the first elder god, while Drazi is the second and Xentun is the third. Supposedly, Dorodeia is the only reason anyone is alive. While she's associated with warmth and life, she's also associated with disaster. This could be interpreted as Dorodeia coming to save us from the disaster that is this world now, or that she's coming to herald a new terrible disaster. Really depends on your point of view. Relatively separate from that, Dorodeia is also known as the two-faced god. In old stories, her appearance is associated with things we normally find cute and unthreatening, suddenly speaking with a strange intelligence. She also is heavily associated with the color white. Some more specific things Dorodeia is associated with, other than a gentle white crocodile and a cunning white owl, are white cats, a forest covered in snow, children born with a mutation that makes them lack melanin and appear almost completely white, and pretty much anything else with a similar mutation. Unlike Drazi and Xentun, Dorodeia has a relatively strong worshipper base that has only been gaining popularity. It's called the Cult of Eternal Winter's Night, and their agenda is unknown even to me. The Gold Lord, or Aura, is a wise god among fools, a god of wisdom but also of opulence. It represents power, prestige, and precious metal. While Aura is recognized in the Church of Origin mythology, it's perhaps more notable in the context of the people who worship it. Aura is one of the lesser gods in the Church of Origin lore, but has a much more robust worshipper base than any of the elder gods. Called the Church of Gold, it's well known for its requirements of followers, including rigorous physical training of themselves and their spirit dog. They congregate in towers around the city, the largest being the tallest building in the world. It creaks to and fro sometimes, but hopefully won't come crashing down anytime soon. They say their god gives them gold in exchange for offerings, but I'm skeptical of that. They've got quite a few mines in the area, likely providing a strong amount of gold. Next, I want to mention some lesser gods. These aren't backed up by sightings of real creatures, so they're not as popular. I wouldn't say they're any less real, not because I believe in them, but because I don't believe in the ones that have been cited either. Sure, there's a monster, but there's no proof that they're sentient gods. Anyway, I still think it's worth talking about them because they're so important to the culture. First, I want to mention a kind of obscure one, the Jungle Lights. Originally, it was a story about a monster to keep kids out of their dives, but it sort of evolved to have a spot in religious lore. There are rumors about a body of the beast being found 100 years ago, but there's really no evidence other than a detailed description of it. Could have just been made up. The Jungle Lights represent a god of the unknown, a god of fear and danger. If you hear people refer to something as their jungle, that's what the phrase comes from. It means they fear it. Technically, it should mean that they fear it specifically because it's unknown and dangerous, but most people kind of just use it as a general fear. Another god known in association with Dorodeia is simply called Old Cathedral. The name refers to the building in which a statue representing it was found, a building made a very long time ago. It's in East Anthropos near the lake and is thought to have represented Dorodeia, or the false sun. It's a strange-looking dragon with a cat head and some sort of bird on its tail, which can be compared to Dorodeia, which has a crocodile head and an owl head on the other side. Of course, Old Cathedral isn't actually that, it's just a stone statue that's about 10 feet tall. Surrounded by what looked like lanterns, it was clearly held with some sort of significance. Nowadays, it's viewed as a sort of sidekick to Dorodeia, and people occasionally use Old Cathedral to refer to a longtime friend. It's not that important in the grand scheme of things, but I thought it was an interesting god to talk about. There's also Astrom Iodi, the god of uncanny perfection. Its depictions are really weird, often with inconsistent patterns, faces, and number of fingers. The most common depictions show Astrom Iodi with 10, 11, or 12 fingers, but older ones sometimes show anything between 6 and 18 fingers in total. The patterns on its torso are never consistent, seemingly just whatever random shapes the artist feels like drawing at the moment. There tend to be two popular styles of Astrom Iodi depictions, one that leads more toward uncanny with uneven fingers and an asymmetrical face, and another that leans more toward perfection with a perfectly symmetrical face and features the author or popular culture in general finds attractive. Any good depiction has a good bit of both though, and in my opinion the closer you get to the middle, the better. With visual automatic books, also known as movies, becoming incredibly popular in recent years along with playable movies or video games, skeptics of the technology's positive potential tend to use Astrom Iodi as a symbol for the evils of movies and video games. They say the technology is making escapists out of everyone, making them think the possible ideal of perfection could somehow be reality. The main criticism to this argument is that cozy media is just one genre, and many, if not most, visual automatic books depict a world worse than the one we live on, so the idea that people use it to escape is less likely than the idea that people use it simply as entertainment or to enjoy a thought-provoking piece of art. And of course, if people really enjoy media that gives them an escape from reality, the problem might not be the media, but the reality. Anyway, the last god I want to talk about is the Fell Maiden Hydra, or just the Fell Maiden. It's not associated with sightings of any actual critters, but it's one of the more important gods in religious lore. Considered the god of the underworld, they made a dimension the Allfather couldn't reach, where the worst of humanity and those who hated the Allfather were banished to. In the oldest religious lore, the Fell Maiden was depicted as a terrible monster disguised as a young woman who would eat heroes trying to rescue her. These stories were likely fabricated by the subjects of kings who wanted to stop do-gooders from breaking into castles and taking back distressed concubines, but more recently the Fell Maiden has become a sort of derogatory allegory for trans women. The idea that they were more sentient and human-like was cemented, and their disguise was just a sick way to trick men. The Fell Maiden Hydra became the Deceiver god, the god of homosexual love, which to this day is strictly outlawed in Anthropos and Espiriq. At the same time though, the Fell Maiden is used as a symbol for queer people around the world, especially the Orient. While religious people obviously depict people who claim to worship the Fell Maiden as demented cultists, most don't actually believe the Fell Maiden exists and think of it more as a symbol of anti-religion. They depict the Fell Maiden as a trans woman who created the underworld as a safe haven to protect good people from the blood god. Even in queer circles though, the Fell Maiden is pretty controversial because some are still religious and some just don't think it's wise to parade a symbol of evil like it represents them, just because a few things about it aren't actually evil. At the end of the day, it's really up to your own interpretation on whether you think the Fell Maiden is a good icon or not. It certainly gets people talking about your cause, but may make it harder for people in the middle who are uninformed or misinformed to see things your way. She definitely looks cool though. Espiriq is another country that's similar to Anthropos in a lot of ways, but its religion is pretty different. Espiriqui religion revolves around spirit fusion, and the idea that getting closer to nature around you in this way gets you closer to the Allfather. They believe that the reason you can't directly see the Allfather is because he's fused with everything, and is all around us. Espiriq has its own pantheon of gods, some of whom are shared with Anthropos, but they view their gods very differently. They're much more humanized, for lack of a better word. They're depicted with feelings and emotions and love, with too many stories to count written about the various gods and their relationships. While Espiriqui gods are much more popular in their literature and are known better in Espiriq than Anthroposian gods are known in Anthropos and Lunix, they're also not quite taken as seriously. People don't revolve their lives around the religion as much, other than with spirit fusion. It's sort of expected to believe in these gods as a social thing, but as long as you don't actively speak against it, no one's going to come after you or anything. There are priests who help people with magic and practice more obscure rituals regarding their religion, but other than that, you can kind of just do whatever. Unless you're gay. Or probably other things also. The most popular Espiriq gods in global pop culture are Zaru, god of wisdom and insanity, and their pantheon leader god Denariites, the peaceful and loving god of thunder and warfare. Okay, I'm being a little silly with the second one. Denariites is usually depicted as a terrible god who cares for nothing but the spoils of war, sex, and the sound of booming thunder. But there's an old cult who takes the stories literally, while also forgetting 90% of the stories. They pretend Denariites is real while none of the other gods are, and depict him as a loving god incapable of error. While they claim their depiction of Denariites loves everyone, they also claim he will declare war on non-believers, sentencing them to eternal suffering. This cult is surprisingly popular for how easy it is to disprove his claims, and about 20% of Espiriq citizens identify with the cult in varying degrees. Might be the music, I've heard it goes hard. They call themselves Disciples of Thunder or Denariites. I know I said they don't think the other gods are real, but Denariite religion does technically recognize another god, Zaru. They don't think of it as a god though, and their mind is closer to a demon. In Denariite stories, Zaru was a force of mischief that gave humanity the forbidden knowledge of evil, making them imperfect. Denariites are known for their idea of forbidden knowledge as the worst thing ever. They imagine children to be perfect and free from evil, only falling when they learn the evil of the people around them. They value ignorance, seeing education and science as deplorable. Not everyone sees Zaru as an evil character though. Like I said, he's primarily the god of wisdom, even if insanity always follows. Espiriq culture tends to value wisdom, unless you're Denariite of course, but there's an idea that the wiser you get, the harder it is to avoid insanity. Zaru is a really fascinating god, associated with the most intelligent people, but also with insanity, silliness, and whimsy. Zaru is known globally for the popularization of the idea that play in animals is associated with intelligence, and generally dissipating the idea that there's a hard line between humans and other animals. Of course, Zaru is even better known for all sorts of interesting stories regarding the blurry line between wisdom and insanity. Of course, it's likely that someone considered insane is just that, and their brain doesn't work or something, but isn't it interesting to think that they might know something nobody else does? Taurus worships the Allfather in a way similar to Espiriq, but they call it a different thing. While the main religion of Taurus is technically more involved than Espiriq's, they're more okay with you not believing in it. Their main ritual is meeting with other believers once a week and eating, but only about a third go every week, and another third goes a few times in a year. There's no written punishment for not going, it's just sort of a social thing. Legally, Taurus is definitely one of the better countries in the Orient for queer or otherwise unusual sorts of people, but with the greater potential for a more extremely devoted religious people, hate crimes aren't uncommon. Kaidos bears aren't very well understood because of how few come to the adjutant and how they're pretty difficult to speak to. They prefer to communicate voicelessly in something like sign language, but can be taught to speak common in a sort of code made up of growls. I'll talk about that more in a dedicated video, but so far we do know a bit about their religion and culture. Rather than worshipping a god, they sort of fear them. They burn offerings of meat and forage to certain gods in hopes that they can be soothed. There's a drought god, a war god, and a death god, all of which are pretty straightforward. Basically, you offer your stuff to the gods and hope the gods don't do their thing. However, there's also a mimic god, which might seem strange at first, but there's a good reason. As Kaidos were forced inland by rising sea levels, their habitat combined with the habitat of the mage bear, which isn't technically considered sapient, but it is very smart. It can actually speak human languages in what sounds like a woman's voice to lure travelers in and kill them. No one's totally sure why it likes to kill people so much more than anything else, but theories range from magic to boredom. People have reported not hearing the voice when someone else in the group does, hinting that mage bears might have an ability similar to Psudoxians to speak inside someone's mind. That would also explain how they can sound like a human woman. While they can speak, there's evidence that they might not know what they're saying. Their words are usually along the lines of, "Help! What is that? What's wrong?" and "That's not a person." It's likely that they're mimicking previous victims. Anyway, yeah, soothing the mimic god is supposed to make mage bears less likely to appear. Elves mostly come from a place that's currently called Drittaland. It was founded as a protest of the Allfather siege of the Orient in 2000, and was one of the first countries to not have an official religion. Its founder and first leader is a man known as the Twice-Cursed Prince, who is still alive today after all those years. Most people in Jordanland are atheists, and if they're not elves, they're immigrated here for a reprieve from Anthropos and other unsavory state religions. Some people say they worship the Twice-Cursed Prince, but he's a prince in name only and his power is only social. Jordanland is the only democratic country in the Orient. But there's two more groups of people to talk about. They're from a distant planet called Pam, or more accurately, its moon, Pamela. Padogs look suspiciously normal for an alien, even on the inside. I mean, they have 2 rib cages and grow like no known animals, but they still do have a rib cage, a respiratory system, and a lot of things that animals on Origin have. They use mana like any other life form, and have convergently evolved something only humans are known to have. They store their mana in their blood and can gain the same super powerful effects of drinking human or Padog blood. Because of this trait, many Padogs have been indoctrinated into the Church of Origin and are politically aligning themselves with Anthropos. Not all Padogs are like this though. The traditional belief system is centered on the tree they live on. Since coming to Origin though, they don't live on a tree anymore. There's none big enough to accommodate a whole colony of Padogs. Now that they live on the ground, their whole belief system has fallen apart, leaving them more susceptible to the whole Anthropos thing. Crazimals are the other species of aliens who are teleported here, alongside their favorite snack, Padogs. You might be thinking, a carnivorous group of people that eats a herbivorous group of people? How unheard of! But this isn't even the first culture I'm talking about with sapiovoric tendencies. Yeah, Psudoxians have some unsavory history with the genocide of a group of people they ate. Anyway, Crazimals have a really weird kind of morality and religious system. They value art over anything else, and they consider "don't limit us" a valid excuse to eat Padogs. Their religious and political leader is called the Darling of Oblivion, which seems to be a standard monarchical system for the most part, other than the fusion of religious and political power. While they sort of worship this Darling of Oblivion, they primarily worship a figure called the Flayed Lord. It's a god of art and drama which was said to have torn out its own skin to create Crazimals. Someone who does something considered to be bad is expected to cut themselves or be cut somehow. The most cut up people aren't criminals though. They are most often religious people who hold themselves to a higher standard and will cut themselves for things most people would consider normal. The most religious monks will even have torn up wings, making them unable to fly. Some morally wrong things in their view include being shy, getting ashamed, getting embarrassed, shaming someone else, embarrassing someone else, or getting in the way of art. Sabotage is one of the worst sins in the ideology of the Flayed Lord. They're all about drama, monologues, and a good show. Fun is the bottom line for everything. Crazimals are infamous for playing with their prey, which again includes Padogs. Supposedly, Crazimals were among 3 sapient species on their home planet, the others being related. They don't include Padogs on that list though, so it's possible there are more. The reason I bring that up is that it seems that their morality was normal there, and mostly unquestioned. Here, most people view morality under the lens of pleasure or pain, considering it bad to hurt someone else. With these new ideas, some Crazimals would rather not hunt Padogs anymore, preferring to hunt less intelligent prey. They still have a very strong prey drive though, stronger than Psudoxians or Nutius, so they have trouble refraining from hunting entirely. And that's all I got for this video. Check out my Patreon to support me for just $1 a month, and get your name at the end of my videos. Thanks Captain Kobop, Art of Dying, and Mr. Kill. Hey, look at that! I've now officially talked about every group of people on Origin, at least for a little bit. Draconye, Taniyn, Psudoxians, Sporovvye, Rifa, Lycans, Theocrats, Noir, Trifle, Humans, Fused Humans, Elves, Kaidos, Padogs, and Crazimals. Who the fuck